Hey everyone, welcome to a Screenwriter's Take, and we're talking about Ant-Man and the Wasp, which I just watched on Netflix, and I'm so excited. I'm so excited about the MCU again. Oh man, you know, I saw Captain Marvel, and you saw my long review and analysis of it, and you just watch a movie like Ant-Man and the Wasp, and it's just a breath of fresh air, and you gotta wonder, how could they have missed so much with Captain Marvel? When you watch any of the great Marvel movies, and this was a great one. And I'll go even out on a limb here, and I'll say Scott Lang is the best character in the MC universe. And I got plenty of things to justify that, and I'll get to that in a minute. But first, let me give you my non-spoiler review of the movie. So, non-spoiler. Ant-Man and the Wasp is really good, real great follow-up to the first movie. The writers are really good at setting up a lot of things so that Scott and company have a lot of hurdles to overcome. You really feel like the characters, have been through a lot even since the last time you saw them, which was very interesting. I felt like I missed the whole movie. So much had happened since the last time I saw Scott and, the other characters. There was a lot of fallout in what happened the last time you see Scott, Ant-Man, in, I guess it was Civil War. Civil War, right? That's the last time you see him. Really, really good. At first I was a little resistant, so I'm like, Jesus, this seems to have been a lot happened here, but it all comes together in this movie. I will say it's a very fun movie, so there are a few moments, well, it gets a little, I'm not going to say hokey, but it gets very sort of comic booky in terms of like, how many henchmen does this guy have kind of way, but that is really nitpicking. I mean, the movie's a lot of fun. I enjoyed the villains, especially because they're not, I watch a lot of crime movies, and I watch just a lot of movies and shows in general, and I think it's a real mistake to go right to murder, go right to torture, even when you're dealing with criminal characters, because I've done personally a lot of research on organized crime, and it's not that, criminals are virtuous people, but they know that killing somebody is a big hassle. And they're not going to go through that hassle unless it's incredibly profitable, incredibly needed. It's just a lot of trouble. It brings a lot of heat. So it was refreshing to see a movie where I felt like there wasn't going to be like a million murders, and it didn't feel unrealistic. It felt fairly realistic. Now, granted, the movie's light, and there's some moments that are a little too light, but overall, I would give the movie. I'd give the movie like a solid 8.5. Yeah, 9 maybe. Yeah, I'd go 9. I wouldn't say it's perfect. There's little flaws in it, but in terms of MCU movies, solid entry. I don't know why this movie didn't get more press. I don't know why people didn't talk about this movie. They're banging Captain Marvel out and beating us over the head about this empowered woman stuff. And here, you got Ant-Man and the Wasp. What about the Wasp? Hello? She's very empowered. She kicks ass in the movie. And she has superpowers. One of the villains is a woman. She's very competent. She kicks ass in the movie. The Wasp mom, Mrs. Pym, is in the movie, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. She brings a ton of weight to the movie. So there are a lot of strong women roles here, and even Ant-Man's daughter has a really good performance and comes off as a very competent female character. So here's a movie with four really super solid female characters that when you watch the movie, you get behind, well, not the villain obviously, but you can get behind all of them. And it's like, why are they pushing this Captain Marvel, this weak ass Captain Marvel, and calling us, and I'm saying like comic book fans of my age and era, calling us misogynists just because we don't like it? It's really an outrage. It's a shame that this movie didn't get the press it could have, and it all comes down to, I think, in Captain Marvel, and I'm sorry to keep talking about Captain Marvel, but I think Brie Larson is just really miscast. I think the Wasp, the actress who plays the Wasp, I forget her name now, she would have made an excellent Captain Marvel. She is, she's not, I wouldn't say she is like as soft as, say, like a Gal Gadot, who's very charismatic and much softer in terms of her delivery, but I will say that I don't know a word to describe it, very, very competent, I would say. Her performance is, it's focused, it's there, you believe her in the role. It's not like Brie Larson where you feel like, does she want to be in this movie? You feel like everybody wants to be in this movie. Everybody's having a great time, and it is a great time. Okay, so that's my non-spoiler review. See Ant-Man and the Wasp. It's on Netflix now, if you haven't seen it. Oh, and I'll say one more non-spoiler thing. The end credit sequence is crucial to Endgame. It's crucial. We all know Ant-Man's in Endgame, and it's crucial. Okay? So it ties into Infinity War. So you gotta see it. At least, the very least, Google the after credit scene, because you're gonna need it. Okay, so here's the spoiler review. The Screenwriter's take, first act. The first act is set up, and this being a sequel, you don't have to quite set up as much, or you can set it up much faster. But there's a lot to unpack here, because what they set up is the fallout from Ant-Man being in the Civil War movie. Because, it's been a while since I saw the movie, so I don't remember exactly. I know he's in it. But because he was involved in the whole Civil War thing, he got into a lot of trouble. And he's basically under house arrest. And that sort of frames the whole movie, that house arrest. At first, I thought it was going to be like, oh, well, Scott's always in trouble and whatever. But, it was crucial to the movie that Scott's under house arrest. I mean, the whole movie's kind of like, it's about like Scott can't screw this up for his daughter and his future and all that. They bring back, of course, Louise and the guys in the surrounding cast who are going to do the security business. They're sort of the weakest group, or the weakest characters in the movie, but they're still fun. I like them, even though they're obviously there because, well, we need these funny, wacky characters to constantly be in the movie and go, wow! But Lewis is not annoying. He's a lot of fun. He keeps showing up. He keeps trying to help. And so him being in the movie wasn't annoying. And they had a great setup in the beginning with Scott and his daughter, and the setup that the FBI keeps checking in on him, because if he breaks that curfew, he's going away for 20 years. So there's a lot at stake right at the gate. And it's a great setup for the movie because it's a very serious situation for Scott. And this is why Scott is such a great character in the MCU, because he's so flawed. Okay? He's an ex-con. He's trying to get his life together. He's always in a little bit of trouble. He's a little bit, I wouldn't say Scott's sketchy. He's definitely gone straight, but, he still kind of breaks the rules. And the great thing about the whole movie is there's this tension that, is Scott going to screw up and go back to prison? Because that was the tension. It wasn't the tension that Scott was going to get killed or whatever. We all know that's not going to happen. The tension was, is Scott going to get caught? And I could see the MCU, I could see a situation in which Scott gets caught and still is an endgame because, of what happens in the first part of Infinity War. So that tension's very real when you're watching it. So the first act sets up Scott and his whole deal, and then he has this crazy dream with Michelle Pfeiffer being set up in a flashback, which is also a big setup. You don't quite know what's going on. Some great CGI too. They do. Michelle Pfeiffer, Michael Douglas, and Lawrence Fishburne are in the movie, and they're younger. There are scenes, flashback scenes with them being younger, and they CGI their faces to make them look young. So those are pretty cool. Those are pretty cool just to see. So the whole premise of the movie is, of course, that Mrs. Pym was trapped in the quantum realm, and they believe she's still alive, and they're trying to get her back. So what initiates it is Scott has this dream, and he sees a vision of her and calls Hank Pym, even though he's not supposed to have any contact with him or Hope, who are still fugitives. You know, he contacts him. Well, he doesn't really contact him. He leaves him a phone message and then changes his mind and destroys the hidden phone he had in his house. So that's a great setup. I mean, and then they kidnap Scott because he's the only one that could help them locate Michelle Pfeiffer. So now it's this whole like, well, he's got to help them and get back before the FBI shows up again to ruin his life. And so the whole first act sets up this dynamic, and then on top of that, they set up Sonny Birch, who is played by Walter Goggins, who always plays a great Southern villain. Another great casting by the MCU. I don't know how. It drives me nuts that they cast Brie Larson, because I think she's so miscast, and yet everybody in Antman and the Wasp is just perfectly cast, right? So Walter Goggins is a great sleazeball, and his whole deal is he's stolen a bunch of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra technology, and he's selling it on the black market, and that's how Hank Pym and Hope are getting their gadgets together. And then, of course, he does the double cross, which totally feels realistic with a guy like him. And then on top of that, they add in the mysterious ghost character. So, we got two heroes in this movie and two villains. And right away, it's like, Scott gets back in the suit, and there's fighting and shrinking, and they got to get these components because there's a lot at stake to save Michelle Pfeiffer. And so the first act ends with the setup. It's everybody's setup. It's Scott, Hope, and Hank. It's the villains, Sonny Birch, who wants the lab and all the technology. It's also kind of the FBI, even though they're not really villains. And it's also Ghost, who needs the technology to save herself because, as it's revealed in Act 2, Ghost is a character who was the daughter of a rival of Hank Pym, who did his own experiment, went wrong, and she suffers from this phasing problem that messes up her molecules, and she's going to die if she doesn't get help. The great thing about Act 2 is things are slowly accelerating in Act 2, with the FBI constantly being teased about Scott and going back to his place to check on him, and Scott keeps getting back just in time, or figuring out a way to hide his lack of presence there. So that the heightening is really the complexity of the movie. And unlike Captain Marvel, where it just seems so convoluted, it works in Ant-Man and the Wasp because it's all connected to the same thing that's been set up in the previous movie, which is this new technology that Dr. Hank Pym invented that everybody wants. So Pym is trying to fix a mistake of the past, while everybody else around him is trying to get at his technology for reasons that, you got Sonny Birch wants it for greed, and then you got Ghost who wants it to save her own life, mainly, and kind of to get revenge on her father at first, you think. You think she's kind of a bad person, and she kind of is, but they help her anyway. And that was refreshing to see. Like, it would have been very easy, and I think it would have been the usual Hollywood thing to kill off a character like Ghost. To just have a scene in which, they fight her and she gets killed or gets quantumized to nothing. I liked it that, and again, we're doing the spoilers here. I liked it that by the end of the movie, they're helping her. They help her, and that drives the final scene of the after credit scene in the movie, which ties into Infinity War. So go figure, right? So this complexity kicks up and up and up, and it's all about, can they save Michelle Pfeiffer before either Ghost or Sonny Birch or the FBI get them? And so that's what mainly Act 2 is about. Then Act 3 is sort of this crazy chase, crazy three-way chase between the FBI, Sonny Birch, and Ghost. And man, it just all works. It was really crazy watching the movie because I'm watching it going, how's this all going to work? But it really does. And it's so much fun to watch them use the shrinking and growing technology in the various chases and fight scenes. That's all fun. The fact you got Wasp and Antman, and they didn't have to make Wasp the better of the two or anything. They're equally good in their own ways. Scott has a different skill set, and which comes out in a crucial scene when they steal the lab back from Ghost and Lawrence Fishburne. Right, the misdirection. See, without Scott, you wouldn't have that scene, and that's very crucial, I think, in any screenplay. You justify the presence of characters when something happens that only that one character could do. So we see what Scott brings to the table. And what he brings to the table in this movie is he's been cooped up in the house, he's been learning magic, and magic is partly about misdirection. And so that comes into play in that scene where they steal back the lab. And, in the wacky scene that his Ant-Man costume doesn't work quite correctly is always fun too, because Scott is a more fun, less competent character than, say, the Wasp, but in the end I think it makes him look to be a stronger character because he overcomes all his shortcomings, and the Wasp, she's not totally without her flaws. She's her and Hank Pym are a little too grouchy. They turn people away, a little too focused on their deal. Certainly Hank Pym has his faults, and his past leads to a lot of the events. And that's a great thing about the movie too. It's the long history of the characters in Hank Pym that helped drive the movie forward. I mean, the whole reason they're even the plot even exists is because Michelle Pfeiffer on a previous adventure had to shrink down to stop a missile, and couldn't come back from the quantum verse, and that's why they're trying to save her. So all that backstory ties in everything, and that's what's so good about the movie, so tight about the screenplay. Everything about the screenplay is about saving Michelle Pfeiffer, ultimately. Yes, you've got this thing about Ghost, which is but that's an obstacle. That's an obstacle for the characters to overcome, and they overcome it. And then it ties in great at the end when Michelle Pfeiffer, at the end of the third act, cures Ghost, at least temporarily. And that's great too. And, that Scott finally gets free, and, it's all a great happy ending. You feel like you didn't waste your time with this movie. It all comes together, and there's a lot of stuff. And, the fact that Sonny Birch doesn't kill anybody, gets caught, you have somewhere to go with Sonny Birch. If Sonny Birch comes back in another Ant-Man movie, and let me tell you, I would love to see another Ant-Man movie. I hope they do another one. Ant-Man and a Wasp movie too. Do it. I say. I'm sure you can come up with a plot, Probably not as important as that one, unfortunately, but I am so psyched again to see Endgame. I cannot tell you how depressed I was after seeing Captain Marvel and just feeling like awful. It was like eating junk food, you know? And then like watching Ant-Man and the Wasp, it renewed it renewed that great feeling I have about the Marvel movies again. I'm so glad I waited to see this movie because it feels like I've erased most of the bitter taste of Captain Marvel out of my mouth. And you know, I really hope Endgame they don't screw it up too much with Captain Marvel, because if Captain Marvel, the only reason Captain Marvel's making money is because the rest of the MCU is so strong. Let's be honest, and the fact that they're flacking it so hard. I mean, everybody wants to see Endgame who's in the MCU. You got to go see it. If you're invested like 4 or 5 movies, even, you got to see MCU. The final, it's basically going to be, on my prediction, the final movie. You know, after this, if they make any other movies, it's probably not going to be, you know, it's not going to tie into anything. It's not going to be a big deal anymore. Most of the actors will probably start leaving or being replaced. It won't quite be the same. And quite frankly, you know, if they're going to push characters like Captain Marvel on us, you know, do we really want to see more of the MCU? Wouldn't it be better to end on a high note and just, you know, put it up on the shelf for a few years and then maybe kind of reboot it down the road with some different stuff? I don't know. I'm very worried about Endgame in some respects, but I am still psyched to see it. I don't think they could screw it up too much. I don't think they're going to... My hope is they don't walk away from Captain Marvel going, oh boy, did we do something good. You know, all the feminism we hammered into Endgame's going to really go over big. God forbid that happens. God forbid they ruin Endgame. I'm going to be so upset. But let me tell you something. If you haven't seen Ant-Man and the Wasp, you should see it. You know, it's a really tight script. The only criticism I'll give it is what I said in my non-spoiler, is that Sonny Birch has too many henchmen. You know, the chase goes on a little long. Guy's got a million guys. But that's okay. I can forgive that. It's a comic book movie. Henchmen are a given. Let's be honest. You know, if you're going to have these long, drawn-out fight scenes, and if it's going to feel like you're up against the wall, you want to have an endless supply of henchmen. So that I did not mind. It got a little crazy at one point, but I could forgive it. I also love the FBI guys, you know, because for the most part they were well-meaning guys, and you even had the one corrupt guy in there, which, you know, explains a lot of how, you know, some of these characters can know to be places and get things, and get information. You know, all that made sense. It really tied in. There wasn't very little fat in this movie. And I believe that end scene with Scott at the end, which ties into the end of Infinity War, is going to be crucial to Endgame. So, you know, I'm glad I saw it. I was half tempted, like, how good could it be? It was really good. Really great follow-up to the second movie. You know, one thing I'll say, too, is Hollywood seems to have this weird deal with superhero movies where they do the first movie and one villain. Then they do the second movie and 2 villains. So my advice would be, don't do a third movie with 3 heroes and 3 villains. That's like too much. I mean, that's what they did in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, and that got to be too much. There were too many villains in that Spider-Man movie. Not that I wouldn't love to see a movie version of the Sinister Six, but I think you have to build to that. I think maybe the Sony movies could build to that. You know, if they keep making super high quality ones like they've made. I really enjoyed the Spider-Man movies, and you know, I enjoyed them in Civil War, and I enjoyed the first Spider-Man movie, I should say. The second one, saw the previews for that at Captain Marvel, and that looks really good. So what I'll say in terms of screenwriting, if you're looking to write a good action movie, a good adventure action movie, light, just look at the balance of all the elements in Ant-Man and the Wasp. And the reason Scott Lang is such a great character is because he's so flawed. And it's those flaws that drive the tension in the movie. Is Scott going to screw up things with his daughter? Is Scott going to go back to prison? Even though death doesn't hang in the balance for these kinds of movies, that tension is real, and that's really there. Because you can see a version, you can imagine a version of this movie in which Scott goes to jail, Scott messes up with his daughter again, and you like him so much you don't want to see that. And that's where the tension comes from. You want Scott so badly to win. And even his screw-ups, which are recapped in this movie by Louise in a great scene, which again, lots of fun, very funny. They're not like Scott being stupid. They're not Scott being mean or greedy. It's Scott trying to help people, and the old saying, no good deed goes unpunished kind of thing. And that's a great setup. And even though the characters are mad at him, especially early on in the movies, they eventually learn to forgive him. And it makes total sense that they forgive him because of the reasons he screwed up. And it's really not a screw up so much as he could have maybe handled things better, but ultimately they forgive him because what he did was good. And that's great. I mean, that's a complex dynamic there, right? Hank Pym and Hope at the beginning of the movie, they're furious at him. They hate him. They don't want to talk to him. And because they blame him for everything that's happened. And yet, he did it because he was trying to be a good person. And even though it kind of hurt them, at the same time, they have their own deal, and some of it's on them, some of it's on Dr. Pym because of the way he acts and the bridges he's burned over the years. So that's a nice, complex dynamic. And there's a lot you can do with that. There's a lot you could do with a character with a long history like Dr. Pym. There's a lot there. And that history really helps the whole movie because you feel like you're watching something that has unfolded, and there was these heroic heroes in the past, and now you're seeing them again, and you're seeing the heroes of the future, and you're teasing the heroes of the distant future because Scott's daughter is in total admiration of her father, and you could totally see her, a future movie where Cassie becomes a Wasp girl or whatever. I mean, that would be great too. Might even see a little bit of that in Infinity War because they tease something in the after credits about, well, don't get trapped in a time vortex, Scott. So maybe there'll be a little time traveling done with Ant-Man. God, I could see, after seeing that movie, I could even see an Ant-Man series because the character's so much fun. All the characters are. It's a great cast. I revised my rating. I'm gonna give it a 9.5. 9.5 for Ant-Man and the Wasp. Disney, that's the way to do the movie. Please give up on your crazy-ass political agendas and just do a damn good movie like Ant-Man and the Wasp and make Avengers Endgame so awesome. Don't get caught up in politics, please. Okay, that's my review. That's Screenwriter's Take. I hope you enjoyed it, and definitely go see Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I will see you next time.